35 Years of Love, Lies, and Renewal, one woman's journey from betrayal to self-empowerment. After 35 years of what she thought was a secure and committed marriage, the last thing she ever expected was to discover that her husband, her lifelong companion, had been hiding a shocking secret. He had a relationship, a deep, ongoing connection, with another woman. This revelation didn't come from his confession, but rather through a plain, unassuming envelope left in their mailbox. Inside was a typed note and a photograph, her husband with another woman. A stark image that shattered the life she had known. For years, she had thought their life was normal, filled with the mundane but cherished elements of marriage and family, raising children, managing a household, and making ends meet. But after discovering this betrayal, she felt as if she was standing at the edge of a cliff, her footing crumbling beneath her. She started looking back over the years, combing through memories and moments that now felt like they held hidden messages she had missed. She thought of the nights he would come home late, or cancel plans last minute, explaining it away as work demands or commitments to friends. Once, she even suspected he was becoming unusually close with a male friend who was ill. But she dismissed it, telling herself she was overthinking. Now, the pieces fit together in a way she wished they hadn't. At first, she couldn't contain her pain. She was consumed by the need to understand why this had happened. Why he would choose someone else after all they had shared. She scrolled through his call logs, uncovering hundreds of calls between them, each one a reminder of her husband's emotional investment in another person. She agonized over questions without answers. What did this woman have that she didn't? Was there something she could have done to keep his affection? Each time she tried to broach the topic with her husband, she was met with anger, dismissal, or gaslighting. "You're overreacting," he'd tell her, minimizing her pain and deflecting blame. He made it clear that he wasn't willing to cut ties with the other woman, insisting that she was a close friend he refused to abandon. The indignity of the situation left her feeling helpless and alone. Her trust was broken, and her partner, the man she had loved and built a life with, showed no remorse. She wrestled with the question of staying or leaving, torn between the memories of the life they had built together and the reality of the betrayal he had committed. But soon, it became clear that this was not something she could ignore or move past. It was a breach too deep, too damaging. She realized that she had sacrificed so much of herself in her role as a wife, mother, and homemaker that she had lost sight of her own dreams and aspirations. For years, she had subsisted on the hope that their marriage would endure. Yet here she was, forced to confront the harsh truth. In her darkest moments, she found solace in the small steps she began taking toward independence. For the first time in years, she found a job. It wasn't glamorous, and it was certainly a far cry from what she had once imagined for herself. But it offered her something priceless, the feeling of self-sufficiency. She opened a bank account in her own name, something she hadn't done before, and began setting aside money to prepare for a new future. It was a lifeline, a way to start building a foundation she could rely on, independent of her husband's control. Though he continued to taunt her, belittling her efforts and doubting her resilience, each small accomplishment fueled her determination. She saved meticulously, every paycheck symbolizing a step closer to the freedom she craved. On the days he was cruel or dismissive, she reminded herself that she was laying the groundwork for a life that didn't require his approval or support. The more he tried to control her, the more she resolved to break free from his influence. Through this process, she found that her children were a source of unwavering support. She had hesitated to tell them, fearing they would be disappointed or angry. But when she finally confided in them, they offered love, understanding, and encouragement. Her eldest son, outraged by his father's actions, wanted to confront him, but she urged him not to. She wanted to navigate this on her own terms, knowing that her strength needed to come from within, not from others fighting her battles. Her children's encouragement fueled her desire to grow and move forward. They reminded her of the resilience she had shown in raising them, in managing a household, and in facing life's many challenges over the years. Their faith in her gave her the courage to continue her journey of self-discovery, of rebuilding her life on her own terms. And so, she began pursuing her education, taking courses that would qualify her for better-paying jobs and open doors she had once thought were closed forever. The months that followed were filled with moments of doubt, but also of pride. She often found herself thinking back to her younger self, the woman who once had big dreams before marriage and motherhood changed her priorities. That young woman, she realized, was still within her, still capable of achieving and growing. She rediscovered hobbies she had abandoned long ago. From painting to gardening, small joys that reminded her of who she was outside her roles as wife and mother. One particularly poignant moment came on her 35th wedding anniversary, a day that once symbolized years of shared love and commitment. Instead, she spent it alone, making a quiet promise to herself that her future anniversaries would celebrate her growth. Not the painful memories of a broken marriage. She treated herself to a day out, visiting places she had always wanted to explore but had never taken the time to see. It was a small act of rebellion, a way to reclaim the happiness she had once believed was tied to someone else. Over time, her resilience transformed her into someone she barely recognized, a woman who was no longer afraid to stand on her own, who no longer needed validation from her husband or anyone else. She worked 2 jobs, set personal goals, and put aside money for the small apartment she dreamed of moving into. With every paycheck saved, every skill learned, she felt her self-confidence return. She was no longer the same person who had once depended on her husband for approval and support. In her journey, she met others who had faced similar struggles, women and men who had been betrayed, abandoned, or undervalued. They shared stories of heartbreak, resilience, and rebuilding, each tale a reminder that she was not alone. These connections brought healing, and through them, she learned that her worth was not defined by the loyalty or betrayal of others but by the strength and kindness she held within herself. Reflecting on her journey, she saw that the betrayal, while painful, had been a catalyst for change. She realized that she had been living in the shadows, waiting for life to happen to her instead of taking control. This experience taught her the importance of self-respect, of setting boundaries, and of valuing herself regardless of the roles she played in other people's lives. She had found herself not in the comfort of companionship but in the raw, challenging process of standing alone. As she stood at the threshold of a new life, she felt a mixture of fear and excitement. The future was uncertain, but it was hers to shape. She looked back on the life she had built with gratitude, but she looked forward with hope, ready to write her own story, a story of resilience, empowerment, and self-love. In the end, she learned that true love and happiness begin within. Healing from heartbreak: how Karen reclaimed her life and happiness. Karen's story doesn't begin or end with betrayal. It starts with a young woman filled with dreams and ideals about love and family. A woman who chose to dedicate herself wholeheartedly to a relationship that seemed destined for forever. But love, as she would learn, doesn't always follow the path we expect. For years, Karen was a supportive partner. She gave up her own career ambitions to be there for Mark, prioritizing his needs and the family they built together. She was content, finding joy in her children's milestones, the home they created, and the life they shared. But as the years went on, the things that once brought her happiness began to feel more like routines and obligations. Karen often felt a sense of loneliness, a feeling she could never quite put into words. She brushed it off, convincing herself that it was just part of growing older, part of the natural ebb and flow of marriage. The anonymous note she received that day shattered that quiet acceptance. It forced her to confront the truths she had been ignoring, the questions she had pushed aside for the sake of keeping the peace. Mark's betrayal became a mirror, reflecting back to her all the years of sacrifice, all the things she'd given up, and the person she had almost forgotten she was. At first, she felt paralyzed. Questions haunted her, lingering in every quiet moment. Was this my fault? Did I do something wrong? Why wasn't I enough? She spent countless nights replaying their relationship in her mind, wondering if there was something she could have done to prevent it. This spiral of self-doubt was overwhelming. But, deep down, she knew the answer wasn't about changing herself, it was about rediscovering herself. One day, a close friend invited Karen to a weekend art retreat, a place where people of all ages could immerse themselves in creativity. Art had been a passion of hers in college, a pastime she'd set aside after marriage. That weekend, surrounded by colors, canvas, and the soft hum of conversation, Karen felt a spark of joy that she hadn't felt in years. With every brushstroke, she felt herself letting go of anger and grief, channeling those feelings into something beautiful and tangible. Returning home, Karen made a decision. She was going to prioritize her own happiness for the first time in years. She established a routine for herself, one filled with small joys: morning yoga sessions, evening painting, reconnecting with old friends over coffee, and exploring interests she had long since buried. It was difficult at first. She wasn't used to putting her needs first, often feeling guilty for carving out time for herself. But with each passing day, those feelings of guilt began to fade, replaced by a sense of fulfillment she hadn't known she was missing. Around this time, Karen also began journaling, a practice that helped her process her emotions in a deeply personal way. In her journal, she confronted the pain, anger, and disappointment she felt. She wrote about her fears for the future, her doubts, and even the moments when she still missed the companionship she had shared with Mark. Writing became a form of therapy, a way to release her emotions without judgment. And through it, she started to see her journey as one of growth, not just loss. A pivotal moment came when Karen decided to take a solo road trip to the coast. A place she'd always loved, on her own, with no one to consider but herself. She felt a freedom she hadn't experienced in decades. She spent hours walking along the shore, letting the sound of the waves wash over her, feeling at peace. The solitude was healing. She found clarity in the simplicity of the sea and sand, realizing that she didn't need someone else's validation or presence to feel complete. Karen's children were an essential part of her healing journey. Opening up to them about her struggles was one of the hardest things she'd ever done. She feared that they might judge her or think less of her for staying in a marriage that had brought her so much pain. Instead, they surprised her with their compassion, assuring her that they respected her resilience. Their words gave her strength and reminded her of the importance of unconditional love, a love that wasn't contingent on perfection but on being there for one another in times of need. As she navigated this new chapter, Karen faced many challenges. Friends and family sometimes pressured her to move on or forgive and forget. They didn't understand why she wasn't ready to date or why she hadn't forgiven Mark. But Karen knew that healing wasn't about rushing through the pain, it was about honoring her own pace. Allowing herself the time to process and grow, she made peace with the fact that her path didn't have to align with anyone else's expectations. This, too, was part of reclaiming her independence, learning to stand firm in her decisions, regardless of others' opinions. In the months that followed, Karen became more involved in her community, volunteering at a local shelter, teaching art classes to kids, and organizing support groups for women going through similar experiences. Her hardships had given her a unique perspective, one that allowed her to offer empathy and encouragement to others who were struggling. Helping others became a source of strength for her, a way to transform her pain into something meaningful. Throughout this journey, Karen's relationship with Mark remained complex. He would occasionally reach out, offering apologies that felt hollow or seeking to justify his actions. There were times when he would express remorse, other times when he would brush off her pain as if it were inconsequential. But Karen had reached a point where his words no longer held the power they once did. She had built a life separate from his, one rooted in her own values, passions, and happiness. In a final act of closure, Karen wrote a letter to Mark, not with the intention of sending it, but as a way of freeing herself from any lingering resentment. In this letter, she forgave him, not because he deserved it, but because she deserved peace. She thanked him for the good memories, acknowledged the hurt he'd caused, and released him from her life with love. This letter symbolized the end of one chapter and the beginning of a new one. A chapter in which Karen was the author of her own story. In closing, Karen's journey reminds us all of the resilience within us. Life's trials can be devastating, but they can also open the door to a deeper, more fulfilling life, one built on self-respect, compassion, and the courage to embrace a new beginning. Through her story, we see the power of self-discovery, the importance of valuing ourselves, and the beauty of healing, one step at a time. When family bonds break, a tale of betrayal, boundaries, and new beginnings. For years, he had noticed subtle signs of tension within his family. The narrator's two older sisters, each in a different phase of life, had gradually begun to show a sense of resentment that he didn't quite understand at first. They would make offhand remarks about his childless lifestyle, how he and his wife seemed to have all the time and money in the world. Their husbands would snicker, commenting on his easy life. dismissing his hard work and achievements as merely good fortune. Yet for the narrator, these comments felt anything but trivial. His career was something he had poured his life into, and he and his wife had chosen not to have children as part of their plan for a simpler life. It wasn't that they didn't love children. They adored their nieces and nephews, but they had envisioned their life differently. However, his sisters seemed to interpret this choice as a betrayal of traditional family values. The vacation home wasn't just a luxury for him, it symbolized years of hard work, saving, and sacrifice. The house, nestled in a scenic countryside area, was where he and his wife would escape for solitude, to unplug from the hectic pace of life. It was a sanctuary, a piece of tranquility they had earned. But for his sisters, this home represented something else entirely, an opportunity. At first, they hinted that it would be nice if he shared the house more frequently, offering it up as a gathering spot for the whole family. They reasoned that, since he wasn't always using it, the property should be available to everyone. But when he would visit the house after these family gatherings, he often found it in disarray, dishes left unwashed, furniture scratched, items missing. His sisters would laugh it off, saying, "That's what family is for. Don't be so uptight." When his sisters requested to use the vacation home for rental income, it was the breaking point. Their request had been delivered with a sense of entitlement, as though it was only fair that he contribute to their financial well-being. One sister even suggested that they could split the rental income for the family, but he refused, politely explaining that the house was a place of personal refuge, not a source of income. The rejection didn't sit well. Within days, their polite request transformed into guilt-tripping messages, followed by anger. They accused him of hoarding the property for himself, labeling him as selfish for refusing to let the family benefit from what they saw as an idle asset. He realized then that they viewed him less as a family member and more as a means to an end. Not long after, his parents organized a family barbecue at their house. The narrator hesitated, feeling the strain of recent conflicts. But he went, hoping to smooth things over. His sisters, already drinking when he arrived, wasted no time voicing their displeasure. They made snide remarks about how he was too good to share the vacation home and criticized his decision not to wear swimwear, saying he was ruining the vibe. Their children, meanwhile, were running around, encouraged to play rough by their parents. Things took a turn when 3 of the kids decided to shove him into the pool as a prank. He managed to sidestep them, and they ended up tumbling into the water themselves, with 2 of them struggling to swim. When he stayed back, letting others help the kids, his sisters erupted, accusing him of nearly letting their children drown and not caring about his family. Over the following weeks, communication between the narrator and his sisters broke down completely. His parents attempted to mediate, but the sisters remained indignant, convinced that he owed them access to the house. When they found out that he had blocked them on social media and phone, they were livid, sending messages through his parents and demanding to know what kind of family member he thought he was. The final straw came a few weeks later. During the Thanksgiving holiday, the narrator and his wife, on their way home from visiting her family, received a series of frantic messages from his parents and the local sheriff. The brothers-in-law, it turned out, had attempted to break into the vacation home. They had cut through a chain on the gate, damaged the lock, and even broken down an interior door. Their reasoning? They had assumed he wouldn't mind them using the property since he never used it anyway. But the sheriff, upon being alerted by the caretaker, was not inclined to let this go as a family matter. With the support of his wife, the narrator took legal action, pressing charges for the break-in. It wasn't an easy decision. He knew this would likely sever family ties permanently. But he realized he had no choice if he wanted to protect his boundaries and, ultimately, his peace of mind. The charges went through, and his sisters' families faced the reality of court dates, legal fees, and the public embarrassment that came with the incident. For the first time, his sisters seemed to recognize the consequences of their entitlement. But it was too late. This experience was a turning point. Through the conflict, the narrator learned that boundaries were essential. Even with family, it wasn't easy. Cutting ties went against everything he'd been raised to believe about family loyalty. Yet, he came to understand that loyalty couldn't mean allowing others to disregard his hard work, his privacy, and his peace. In a final act of closure, He chose to forgive his sisters internally, not to reconcile, but to free himself from the bitterness. He reflected that, while family is important, sometimes the best way to show love is by stepping away. In protecting his peace, he had finally learned to prioritize his well-being, setting an example for himself and his wife about self-respect. The narrator's journey shows the importance of establishing boundaries, even when it comes to family. While we often feel compelled to keep family close, sometimes our peace demands that we make hard decisions to separate ourselves from toxic dynamics. By choosing self-respect, the narrator offers a powerful message to anyone facing similar family struggles, that sometimes self-care means saying no, setting firm boundaries, and finding the courage to walk away. Ultimately, it's a story of resilience, hard choices, and the realization that family does not mean sacrificing your peace of mind.